I'm going to share a voter guide from SPUR, and I'm going to share it because they are not doing any sort of endorsement. Like, they're not against this proposition and they're not in favor of this proposition. So I feel like they're presenting the facts in an unbiased manner. So let me just go ahead. Okay. So Prop L, disproportionate CEO tax, CEO pay tax. Okay, so it's a business tax based on the comparison of top executives' pay to their employees' pay. So it establishes another gross receipts tax. And I believe we've talked about gross receipts tax previously. It establishes an additional tax on companies that have super high paid executives that make way more than their average employee. So it imposes, it applies to any company that does business in San Francisco. So it doesn't have to be a company that is headquartered in San Francisco. It's just a business that does company that does business in San Francisco. So it's a much bigger proportion of businesses would be affected by this tax. Highest paid employees make at least this much annually. So if their top executives make upwards of $2.7 million annually, and if that ratio exceeds the 100 to 1 compared to the median of their other people, then their taxes would go up by this much. And it's based on the ratio. So if the ratio is even more out of whack, then they get an additional gross receipts tax. And the additional gross receipts tax hike, the hike is just like 0.1%, 0.2%. So it's just sort of like a financial slap on the wrist. But anyways, not to get really into it. Here we go. So today's city's gross receipt tax, it ranges from 0.01% to 0.65%, depending upon the type of business and the amount of annual gross receipts, or the amount of sales that they make, the amount of income that they have, amount of revenue. Businesses that operate only in an administrative office in San Francisco pay a payroll tax to the city instead of a gross receipts tax. For those businesses, the tax would be assessed based on their total payroll expense attributed to business done in San Francisco, and they would get a different payroll amount, slightly higher, intended to capture the same amount. Nonprofit organizations would be exempt from the tax. Yes. So
this
tax, yes, go ahead.
So this proposition seems like it's forcing, I guess, a business owner to decide between either evening the ratio between the CEO pay and employee pay in that company, or if they don't want to do that, they'll just have to pay the additional tax.
Yep. So it's kind of incentivizing a more equitable payment structure, more equitable payment for employee payroll business model. So, and estimates based on like how businesses are, how large salaries are currently in San Francisco, this measure would raise between $60 million and $140 million annually for the city. And this money would go into the general fund. And say what you will about, I mean, it's a matter of like whether or not you trust the city supervisors to use that money responsibly, but it's not going to anything specific. So maybe that's something in favor, maybe that's something against. We'll get into that. And it only requires a simple majority to pass.
What's the expected increase in revenue
from this tax? They estimate between $60 million and $140 million annually from this tax, according to the comptroller's office. That's what they estimate. So yeah, the backstory is that business executives, they make a fuck ton of money. It's pretty insane. So this proposition is aimed at sort of leveling the playing field, or at the very least, making companies feel bad about paying their executives so much more than their average employee. And by making them feel bad, I mean, you know, affecting their bottom line, because companies don't really feel anything. Because they're like, they don't have feelings. They're like robots. Let's see. Federal legislation passed after the Great Recession included some reforms intended to curb the rise of disproportionately high executive compensation.
Wait, so something like Amazon, I'm pretty sure Jeff Bezos earns more money than
Yes.
they would be like greater than 600 to 1 ratio.
Yeah.
So then they would pay an additional 2.4% payroll
Well,
tax.
they would pay, well, it depends. If they only have administrative offices in San Francisco, then they would pay an additional 2.4% on their payroll tax. But I'm pretty sure Amazon would have to pay the gross receipts tax, and they would pay an additional 0.6%. So I think the aim is to like get the same chunk of money, because when you tax gross receipts, you're getting more money. When you tax payroll, you're not getting as much money, and you're also kind of hurting employees slightly, but whatever. But yes.
Does anyone know of actual Amazon, for example, facilities or offices in San Francisco?
I know that
I'm
they
just-
have, I don't know if they have offices, but I know they have one of those Amazon stores, like those live grocery stores where you just walk in, walk out. They have
Do you
one of
think-
those.
Do you think this
downtown.
covers?
Yeah, it definitely covers that, because it's not about whether or not you're headquartered in San Francisco. It's about whether or not you do business in San Francisco and selling
okay.
yeah. So anybody walking into that place, they would, anything sold at that location would get hit with this tax.
Gotcha.
And it would probably be the 0.6, probably the maximum amount.
Salesforce probably too.
Okay, so moving on to pros and cons. So pros, the tax rates are pretty modest and would likely not drive businesses out. The measure is also delayed until 2022 because of what's going on right now with COVID and that impact. And this tax would send a signal to other cities and states, and we would build political momentum to have a more impactful economic reform in the future. So this is kind of the thing of like San Francisco being a bellwether for California, and California being a bellwether for the United States, where it's like if we get the ball rolling on this type of thing, then it could have more impact down the road, even though it's a pretty modest amount of taxation. So the cons, rather than lower executive compensation, this measure could instead drive it into less visible forms that are more difficult to track and regulate. So it could drive, salaries and whatnot underground. I think, like, wasn't there a whole thing with certain top executives, like the top executive at Apple or whatnot, like Steve Jobs, like famously had like a $1 salary or something, like he was paid in stock or some nonsense.
Yeah.
So that there could be more shenanigans like that could just sort of like, this proposition could signal to businesses to just go ahead with all their shenanigans, and that could become the new standard. Like if you become a certain level of executive, then your pay would be different. It would be in the form of stocks or golden yachts or whatever, something that couldn't get taxed. Yeah, they could just give you Teslas on Teslas. This, yeah.
In argument to that argument, or in rebuttal to that argument, I think
Yep.
even if it does drive CEOs to make their compensation less visible, I think if that were to actually happen, I mean, we could pass another bill that addresses that problem, but
Theoretically, yeah.
yeah. So I don't know.
Yeah. So it's like you're arguing that this con argument is pretty flimsy, because it's only raising the specter of something that maybe could happen in the future. And even if it does, we could respond to it in kind. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. Anybody else have anything to say about this argument specifically? Okay. So Rather than increase median wages, this measure could encourage businesses to move middle and low wage jobs out of San Francisco. And it could accelerate automation of these jobs, potentially. Also, this tax is difficult to enforce. That's another con. Businesses interpret compensation in different ways, and this measure relies on private companies to self-report their CEO pay ratios. So that's kind of weird. Maybe in the future we could pass something else that would make it like you would need to report pay ratios, but I guess that's not something that's required. Another con, the final con, is a small number of impacted businesses and the variability in executive compensation mean that this tax could be an unreliable revenue source for the city. So yeah, we could have a huge budget shortfall out of nowhere, and this tax could contribute to that because we were expecting one thing, but we got a different thing. So yeah, I don't know, Stephen, how do you want to do this? Do you want to just open up to main discussion, or should we go line by line, or?
That's is that it? That's all the Spur has right on it. That's all the material.
Yeah, there's other stuff having to do with the backstory, but
yeah, let's just open up to the group.
Yes.
I mean, it seems relatively straightforward, but we'll see if any problems arise. I mean, I was trying to research because I did see that Portland did one of these taxes, and of course, the main concern is that it being a local tax, like with any local tax, companies could, like I said, move just a few miles south, and they wouldn't be liable to that tax. So that's one of the main concerns, I would say. We can
Have they moved? Has there been a lot of movement, business
right.
movement?
You know, I can't find an article regarding that Portland measure specifically. So, you know, I have to get back to you on that. But
They imposed a 10% surtax on companies.
that's pretty fat, 10%.
Exactly. I feel like this measure that's being proposed right here is pretty tame by comparison. Like it's trying very hard not to rile up the business people. Just being like,
Yeah.
Like I said before, I feel like it's only a slap on the wrist. I think it's mainly just the specter of morality that's being raised. It's kind of like taking our morality and putting it into numbers, being like, your bottom line is this is X amount of immorality because your pay is too high.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I would just say I don't think any one individual could possibly be like 600 times more productive than any other individual humanly. You know what I mean? Like, that's crazy. But so is anyone on the fence, or is anyone leading hard yes, hard no? I'm a pretty hard yes on this. It's a start, you know. And for me, I would emphasize that in order to actually make a dent in this I guess this culture or what have you, these type of politics and policies need to be applied on a larger scale, like on the state level, before, you know. So we have to counter this, these companies being so in such great positions that they can just you know, threaten to move 5 miles south, and then you have localities competing with each other, you know, kicking themselves in the foot, trying to appease these corporations. In order to address it on this topic, I would say remember this, and maybe if you hear about any state politicians or people running for office for the state government, something to keep in mind if you agree with these type of policies in the city. Does anyone want to? Can anyone counter that point of view with a no argument? You know, why would this be bad? Just food for thought. People can say, you know, these CEOs deserve their pay. These companies, you know, they pay their CEOs so much for good reason, because they're very productive and they do a lot of good, not just for the company, but for the communities that they're in, San Francisco included. And so we shouldn't discourage people from coming to our city and, you know, occupying some of these towers downtown and providing to our economy and our taxes.
Yeah, I don't know. Looking into this, I've heard it will not be applied to some of the bigger tech companies actually won't
Oh wow.
be hit by this because
What? Why?
they pay most of their workers are actually paid pretty well.
Oh,
Like
I
I don't
see.
know about Amazon
makes
because I guess they do have a lot of low wage workers like in their warehouses and whatnot, but it's really just a numbers game.
Yeah.
But this will mainly impact like hotel businesses that have a lot of like, kitchen staff and cleaning staff that is like minimum wage labor relative to the CEOs. So it's mainly going to hit those companies,
I
not
see.
as much like Twitter or whatnot.
I think that's good because there's so many protests. Every time I go down to downtown, someone from the hotels, there's always a protest like in front of hotels.
Oh yes.
So yeah.
Yeah, I agree. Yep.
And I thought, well, I mean, that sucks, but then, I corrected myself because it's good that for the tech companies, even though CEOs are making a lot of money, that their workers are paid well as well. But if you want to scale it up to the society level conversation, this is addressed through income taxes and other taxes on wealth. Um, that's where that conversation goes. Um, just wanted to bring that up. Any other thoughts? Is this proposition to anybody, less straightforward than it appears right now? Uh,
I think it's pretty straightforward. I mean, I agree with it. I think I voted yes on it.
Yeah, unless you're a really strong proponent for, the government doesn't have a right to really get in the business of how private companies compensate their employees. Then again, a lot of the companies are public companies, right? Publicly owned. So I don't know. That's where that train of thought leads me. Okay, any other thoughts on the line? Going once, going twice. I think we've reached the end of this very long journey. 7 weeks. We covered not all of them, but most of them. And we even covered the candidates for all the different offices. So the election is, of course, in just a few days. Get your ballots in if you haven't already. If you have, good job. And yeah, I don't know. What do people think about the kind of the level of detail we went into on the propositions? Do people feel confident in their votes, or do people feel like there's still so much to research and whatnot?
I feel like I sent in my ballot too early.
Oh, really?
I mean, I didn't want it to get like stuck in transit or whatnot. So I sent it in as soon as I could. And then I voted kind of weird on certain things. Should have waited, but whatever.
Yeah.
I think I'm like semi-confident, but would have liked more
Got it.
more information available. Like for example, today's discussion about the homeless one. No, wait, sorry, the parcel tax one. Like I would have wanted to know if the 2018 Prop G passed or not, or if it was stuck in the Supreme Court or not, or whatever. But like even when I Googled it, I tried to Google that. I didn't find any information on that. So now I'm like, no, I'm kind of unsure, but I'll probably vote yes on this because I don't know if Prop G passed or not. So I think like Google helps. Definitely Google like that. Reading articles help, but at the same time, like voting, I'm still kind of like semi-confident.
Wait, who's are you all of you gonna vote on election day, or have you already mailed in your ballots? Just in general.
I'm
Kinda-
dropping
I'm
my
curious.
ballot off on election day.
Cool.
Yeah, drop off is definitely recommended, especially in San Francisco. Like I'm just saying, I work for the Department of Elections, so definitely like drop off. You're all good in San Francisco.
Just gotta watch out for those other ballot boxes. Those.
Right. Anyone else have any closing thoughts for everybody regarding the past 7 weeks or this whole adventure of being a voter in California?
Just FYI, you can sign up to check your mail-in ballot if it was counted or not. If you just look up where's my ballot. If you live in California, I think.
Alrighty, if we have no other thoughts, thank you so much for sticking with it, doing all this brain work here, trying to get to the bottom of things. Join us on our next spread event, whenever that is. Everyone's on the email list, and that will go out when it goes out. Thank you, everybody. We're gonna stop recording. Feel free to hang out and BS.